Good morning, my name is Alex Selvin, and this is my presentation. The 2014 Netflix television show BoJack Horseman, created by Ralph Bob Wakesberg, tells the story of BoJack Horseman, a washed-up, lonely horse living in Hollywood, which is the animated version of Hollywood in this story. BoJack's claim to fame was his hit 90s sitcom Horsin Around, where he played the father of 3 adopted human children. There are many topics discussed in television series, such as drug and alcohol addiction, self-destructive behavior, post-traumatic stress disorder, and broken households. Though, throughout the whole entire series, I found the most prominent and important topic was BoJack's relationship with the female characters. This led me to my initial research goal, which was to qualitatively investigate how the television show BoJack Horseman portrays male dominance over women and general sexist behaviors. I began doing my research, and it started with the Ambivalent Sexism Inventory, created by Susan T. Fisk and Peter Glick. The important thing about the Ambivalent Sexism Inventory is that it introduced sexism as benevolent and hostile. Benevolent sexism encompasses subjectively positive attitudes towards women in traditional roles. An example, of course, seen in the figure above is protective paternalism, which is the belief that men should protect, take care of, cherish, and provide for the woman that they are with. Also being seen on the figure above is complementary gender differentiation, created in 1987 by Allison Eagley. Complementary gender differentiation is the benevolent aspect of traditional views of women, which assigns them traits consistent with traditional gender roles that men depend on. This example would be a wife or a mother. Excuse me. The next one is hostile sexism, which shows dominative paternalism. Now, hostile sexism encompasses the negative aspects of a relationship. Dominative paternalism is the aspect or the idea that men should control or have control over women. Competitive gender differentiation, also compared to complementary gender differentiation, created in 1987 by Allison Eagley, is the characterization of men as being fit for high-status work roles and women as below them. Moving on, I did a study on interdependence from Emily J. Cross, Nicola Overall, Rachel S. T. Lowe, and James McNulty. Throughout reading, I was introduced to the theory of interdependence and power over women. One key quote I found during my reading was that people lack power when their needs, goals, and desired outcomes are dependent on another's actions or preferences. This really correlated with me because I realized that a lot of the female characters in the show are lacking power to BoJack as they depend on him. As I kept reading, I found another source and another quote stating that people who possess power are able to act as they desire without having to accommodate others' feelings, preferences, and desires. BoJack perfectly portrayed this quote, as he's someone who acts on his own and does not accommodate for the other female characters. I of course continued reading on benevolent sexism, hostile sexism, power over women, and specifically the Kelly and Thibault's 1959 research, which introduced interdependence as a theory, also introduced power over as a theory. Now, with all that research, it led me to my final goal, which was to qualitatively analyze how the television show BoJack Horseman portrays power over women, hostile versus benevolent sexism, and interdependence in relationships. Now, addressing the gap, the central research piece that is absent is an examination of how each theory can be seen in the TV show BoJack Horseman. I began with my method, which was a qualitative content analysis that would result in a frequency chart. Simply, I would watch all 6 seasons of BoJack Horseman, and during that time, the 77 total episodes, I pinpointed just around 31 episodes that I felt perfectly fit or represented whether benevolent or hostile, interdependent, or power over. After I did that, I proceeded to do a character and relationship analysis on many of the female characters that BoJack was close to. Now, once I had watched the series, picked the certain episodes, analyzed them, and wrote about them, I completed my frequency chart. The first table above is a numeric relevance of hostile versus benevolent sexism in the 6 seasons or the specific episodes that I picked. We can see above definitions of benevolence, hostile, and miscellaneous. Now, simply the one miscellaneous scene was an example I found that perfectly portrayed interdependence, but I did not see it as hostile nor benevolent. After doing that, we could see that in the chart, that 73.1%, or 19 out of the 26 instances that I picked, showed hostile. 6 occurrences, or 23.1% out of the 26 instances, were benevolent. Simply what I did was when I watched the show, I selected those episodes and then I honed in on certain instances. As we can see, there's such a higher amount of hostile versus benevolent. After doing the hostile versus benevolent analysis, I did interdependence versus power over. Once I completed that frequency chart, I looked at the results, and it showed that 69.2% showed interdependence, or 18 out of the 26 instances, and 34.6, or 9 out of the 26, showed interdependence. Yet again, seeing power over interdependence. Then, I proceeded to do my relationship analysis. I wanted to start with Diane Newen. Diane's a very important character in the television series BoJack Horseman. She's first introduced in the first episode of season 1. In the first season, her goal is to be the memoirist of BoJack. She writes his memoir, which hopefully revitalizes and builds back his career. Though throughout this time, BoJack learns to become emotionally intimate and close with her, opening up about many things he had never spoken about before. Now, Diane and BoJack have become close friends, and throughout this series, he relies on her for many, many different things, helping him get out of problems, situations, and issues. Though, throughout this time, Diane realizes that this is a horrible, cruel, and toxic relationship that she is in, where she's only ever helping BoJack. In the end, she moves to Houston and realizes that she's done with him as a friend. Their relationship is a perfect example of interdependence. As we can see, Diane relies on BoJack for a career as she's writing his memoir, and soon on they work on other projects, and she's relying on him for emotional support. We can see here she's actually a mess and living at his house because at that time in the show, she was struggling with her husband, she was struggling with work, and she was struggling with life overall. BoJack, in this relationship, showed interdependence as he relied on her for emotional support, always turning to her to help him. There's actually a point in the series where he's nearly dying, and he calls her for help, but she never picks up. Next is Princess Carolyn. Now, Princess Carolyn is quite the interesting character in this show. She plays BoJack's agent and his ex-girlfriend. It's an interesting situation that can be found. In 2007, back in the show, she is the agent's assistant, and at that point, that's where she starts her relationship with BoJack. Princess Carolyn's character and BoJack's relationship perfectly show interdependence, yet again. Princess Carolyn relies on BoJack because he brings in the money for her. She finds him roles, he brings in the money. Also, she relies on him for emotional support. Yet again, another character that needs BoJack when they're struggling with life, when they're struggling with their own relationships, when they're struggling. She ends up adopting a child and she looks to BoJack for help. Now, BoJack, while dating Princess Carolyn, relies on her for intimacy, relies on her for a career, and relies on her yet again for emotional support. Moving on is Gina Cazador. Now, Gina Cazador is only shown in about the 4th and 5th season, but Gina Cazador plays the co-star of BoJack in their hit series Filbert. And at this time, while they're working together, Gina Cazador and BoJack are actually dating. And during the show, BoJack gets in an incident and ends up needing to take painkillers. Eventually, while taking painkillers, he falls to addiction and is struggling with this substance. During this time, they have one scene where BoJack and Gina where BoJack has to strangle Gina's character. It's part of the show, but BoJack in real life is struggling with Gina and they're fighting in the relationship. And due to the substance abuse that he is dealing with, he cannot realize what's reality and what's not. During this time, he's strangling her, and although it's supposed to be a stunt, it goes horribly wrong and he nearly kills her. BoJack finds out what he did, and he realizes he needs to tell the truth. He needs to tell the world what he did. And Gina says, don't tell them anything. Hide this around. I don't want to be known as the girl who got strangled by BoJack Horseman. I want to be known as a good actress. It's a shame because in reality, this happens many times, where female actors and female workers in Hollywood have to hide behind the truth so they can keep their careers. Next, we have Penny Carson. Penny Carson plays the daughter of Charlotte Carson, one of BoJack's oldest friends. Penny Carson, just a simple high school student, becomes friends with BoJack when he moves and goes down to New Mexico to visit Penny and Charlotte. During this time, though, Penny and BoJack become quite close. BoJack helps her with getting her driver's license, with her high school life, and eventually takes her to her prom. Quite the interesting situation given the fact that he's an adult. During this time, he gives her alcohol, gets her in trouble, gets her friends sick, and there's a lot of problems that go on just that night at prom. BoJack turns to Charlotte being seen right here, and says to her, "Run away with me," confessing that he's loved her. But Charlotte rejects him. He goes back to his room, and who's waiting there for him? Penny. At this moment, Penny tries to get into bed with BoJack, but Charlotte catches them in the heat of the moment. BoJack is sent away. Next, and finally, we have Sarah Lynn. Now, Sarah Lynn is one of the most important and crucial characters of the story, and mainly the 6th season relies on her death. Sarah Lynn, as we can see at the end, and if you remember back to the Horsin Around image, played the youngest daughter in the TV series. And Throughout the relationship, Sarah Lynn had always seen BoJack as a father figure, wanting to spend time with him, wanting to go out to the amusement parks that BoJack would talk about going to the beaches, and to all these events. And all BoJack ever did when she was a child was reject her, push her aside. This broke Sarah Lynn's heart. But eventually, as an adult, BoJack started to spend time with Sarah Lynn. And Sarah Lynn and BoJack would not spend time in positive ways. They would go on benders. They would go to clubs. They would go partying, and many times would sleep with each other. Eventually, BoJack takes her on the bender that would kill her. Truly, the end of a horrible relationship. Finally, I did a conversation analysis where I went over many discussions and interactions BoJack had with the female characters. I started with the 12th episode of the 6th season, in which BoJack is having an interview with Biscuits Braxby. Biscuits Braxby is like a late-night host, and they're discussing the death of Sarah Lynn. Simply, this quote is talking about how when Sarah Lynn was intoxicated, BoJack took advantage of her. When she was sober, he gave her the drugs that eventually killed her. Biscuits Braxby is establishing the power that BoJack has over women. Next, I have a monologue from BoJack in the 11th episode of season 1, where he's begging Diane for approval. He's asking her if it's too late for him to be a good person, if it's too late for him to fix himself, or if he's even a good person at all. It's a heartbreaking moment, and it truly shows interdependence as he relies on her for approval, as he relies on her to tell him who he is. Next, we have in the same episode, BoJack representing hostile sexism, making comments on her looks, on her personality, and on her past. Cruel things showing how toxic the relationship was. Now, to look back on my research, my method, and my results, I wanted to discuss some limitations. The first one being that the intended goal was to identify benevolent versus hostile sexism. But as I watched the show, I realized that I was gaining many significantly higher numbers in hostile and very low numbers in sexism. This was clear that the overarching theme was hostile. Also, while doing my research, back at the beginning, I realized that there were limited academic sources, very few papers, studies, research in general on BoJack Horseman and on sexism, specifically in BoJack Horseman. So I had to take general information on theories and on sexism and really hone it into BoJack Horseman. As I stated before in my method, I did not use every single episode, nor every single scene from every episode in BoJack Horseman. If I had spent the time going over all 77 episodes and all scenes in 77 episodes, I certainly would have had more specific numbers. And in a 2015 study by Susan T. Fisk, who was one of the writers of the Biblical Sexism Inventory, she discussed how it's difficult to interpret sexist events as interdependent or power over or benevolent or hostile. And I found that same issue when I was watching the show, because there were many times where I was like, BoJack is showing benevolent sexism, but at the same time he is also showing hostile, or he's showing power over and interdependence. Many combined issues. I went over to my implications. BoJack Horseman has had such a huge influence on the genre of dark animated comedies, as well as television as a whole. Throughout the time of the show, BoJack Horseman has impacted the viewers' ideas of relationship and dysfunctional codependencies in relationships. Viewers are able to see what positive and negative relationships are, and let me let you know that there are certainly very few, maybe even no, positive relationships in BoJack Horseman. BoJack Horseman has also brought awareness to power differentials in relationships, seeing how BoJack treats the female characters, also the male characters, and seeing the power that he has over all of them. And finally, BoJack empowers viewers and content creators to realize and see this is a problem. This is sexism. This is how it's properly portrayed. So if I were to be a content creator, if I were to go and make a television show, a film, and I wanted to portray sexism, that this is a prime example to use. But also, if I were just to be the regular day human being, what can I learn from this? What can I take away from this? How can I become a better person? How can I help my relationships? Now, in the end, Diane moves to Houston. Princess Carolyn drops him as a client. Sarah Lynn dies. Penny Carson leaves him. Ultimately, BoJack's fleeting attempt at control fails because in the end, all the women he ever cared for had left him. BoJack was all alone. Thank you.
First question, how did your initial exploration of the scholarly conversation lead to your final research question?
Absolutely. So, as I stated before, I had an initial research goal, which was just to qualitatively analyze general sexist behaviors. I had limited knowledge and very few prior knowledge on sexism in general. And then once I found my research and I read on interdependence, as stated before in the presentation, and I read on benevolent and hostile sexism, I started to realize that my goal was to analyze those theories.
Okay. Next question. How do your findings provide directions for future research?
As said before, my findings, what I've learned is that, first of all, as we saw, BoJack Horseman is a character who's truly problematic, truly takes control and advantage, has power of relationships. And my findings for future research can show people, you can watch a television series, you can analyze a television series, you can take a television series and focus on sexism, focus on certain theories. So I give the opportunity and the option for people to watch other series, to follow other theories, to go over other situations and problems in this world, and a way to look at it.
Okay, and finally, if you could revisit your research process, what would you do differently and why?
So I have a couple thoughts of what I would do differently. The first one would be, I would probably, a limitation I said before, I would maybe rewatch every single episode and every single scene. Like I said, that would give me much more specific numbers and significantly higher numbers that are more reliable. Another thing I would potentially do different is compare BoJack to different series and different characters. I would want to see what other characters are like and how they treat female characters and compare them to BoJack and see how other creators, writers, directors show characters like this.
Okay, thank you very much.